The 20th anniversary of the Summer of Love saw the Grateful Dead release their most popular album, but it's not well regarded by Deadheads. Why? Stay with us. Welcome, friends, to the 3324 podcast, your premier home for music and movies and all the fun stuff that comes with it. Right, Eric?
That's right.
This is the place to be.
You got it all here.
What more could you want? We don't do politics. We don't do religion. We don't do current events. We do music and movies, which is what makes people happy.
Stuff.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's what makes people happy. They get excited talking about an album they love. They get excited talking about a movie that they love, right? They get all kinds of excitement about that. So in this episode, we're finally going to get to the Grateful Dead. And there's no way that we could do this without an expert. We needed a Deadhead, and I happen to have reconnected with one very recently at an impromptu high school reunion. Hadn't seen this gentleman probably since high school. Mr. Chris Geiger, how are you?
I'm doing well, my friend. And it's nice to be with both of you guys. I really appreciate my Dodge Ferry roots.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a great night of reconnecting, and he was talking about podcasting and maybe getting into it, which is a story for another time, but said, hey, I understand that you're a Deadhead and we want to do an episode. Would you be interested? And he's like, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, this is not one that Eric and I can we could, but it would be boring.
Wait a minute. Let me ask you one question. Sure. Have either one of you been to a Dead show?
See, you're jumping the gun.
He's jumping the gun already.
I have not been to one. I always wanted to go to one, right? And it was more for the experience, like obviously when Jerry Garcia was alive, not with Dead and Company, but it was one of those bands that I recognized that I wasn't like the biggest fan of, but wanted the experience of going to the show.
Yeah.
Eric, what about you?
Yeah, same as me. Yep. I think the closest thing I ever got to seeing any of the members or the original members was Phil Lesh. Because he'd done some stuff with Derek Trucks and Susan Tedeschi. Yeah. So, he likes having that band, like they bring in guests on their Beacon run. So he was one of their guests at one point, and I happened to be at that show. So yeah, that was like the closest thing I ever came to be, seeing an actual member of the Dead on the stage. So yeah.
So it was always one of those ones. And then once Jerry Garcia passed away, it was kind of like, all those bands that you wish you would have seen and you just never did, right, Chris? That you like back in the day, like Queen was a bucket list. Like I would have loved to have seen Queen. Just
Led Zeppelin
around to it. Zeppelin. We were alive for all these bands, but just either you didn't have the money or just whatever the reasons were, and then things happen and you miss the opportunity. So
I am so glad I didn't miss the opportunity for the Dead, but I understand how a lot of people did miss it.
Yeah.
Too, because life goes on and you don't think about things, and sure enough, that guy Jerry Garcia has been dead for 25 years.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it was a big blow.
Big loss.
30 years. No, I'm sorry. No, excuse me.
28 years.
Almost 30 years.
Yeah, right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yep.
All right, so let's get to the stats, and then we're gonna continue on the other side of this conversation. So the album we're talking about, I didn't say it in the intro, is In the Dark, which was released in July of 1987. It was produced by Jerry Garcia and John Cutler. There was one single released, which was Touch of Grey, and it hit number 9. It hit number 6 on the Billboard charts, and it was 2 times platinum, which was the Dead's best-selling album ever. And then we've got one more stat. Chris, how many times have you seen the Dead?
I would say between 20 and 25 times.
So, and Chris Geiger has seen them between 20 and 25 times. So that's the final stat that we're going to put out there as well. So just so you know the pedigree
exactly. of I think that's a fair estimate.
Are you talking up to Garcia, or are you talking Dead and Company?
The actual Grateful Dead.
So you're not talking, have you seen Dead and Company?
Yeah, I've seen all the permutations, everything. Okay. And I really do like Dead and Company personally. I have to say, I think they do a great job. I never was a fan of John Mayer.
Yeah.
But I think he really loves the music, and I think he tries to do his best.
Yeah.
His contribution is really good. Yeah.
Yeah. He actually just released he just released a statement actually saying that 2023 is going to be the last year.
Yep.
for Dead and
Mhm.
Company, or at least
I
with his
did.
involvement, or I guess so as he goes, the
They're
rest will.
supposedly on their final tour right
Yeah.
now.
Are you going to go?
Okay.
Do you have plans to go see him?
I don't actually.
Okay.
You know, I mean, I have seen them a couple of times,
Yeah.
and I do enjoy it. I've
Mhm.
seen them at City Field, and I've seen them someplace else. I forgot where, but they're great. But it's nothing like the original.
Yeah, of course.
Of course.
It pales
Yeah.
in comparison. So let's give a little brief history about the Grateful Dead. They were formed in 1965 in Palo Alto, California. Their first album was in 1967, though. Known more for their live releases than for their studio work. There's one of the anomalies, and you know, as we go through this conversation about the Grateful Dead, this is a band unlike any other band, or at least any other band, Eric, that we've spoken about, right? Usually,
Mhm.
when we do episodes about music, it's about an album that had a specific impact or the trajectory of a band in the studio. And in this
Right.
case, we're really not going to be talking about the Dead. We're going to be talking about one album in particular, but the Dead isn't a band known for their studio work. They took the notion of what a band is, especially in the 70s,
Mhm.
and kind of turned it on his head, really.
Right. They were a
Right, Chris?
touring
I mean,
band.
yeah.
That was their lifeblood. Yeah. Their bread and butter, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think
the first jam band.
yeah, they kind of set the
I
stage,
would
didn't
say,
they?
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Matt.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm
No, go ahead,
not
Chris.
Matt. That's not
Yeah.
Matt.
That's not Matt.
I'm Eric.
Oh
I'm
boy,
Eric.
it's kicking in.
It's kicking.
What were we gonna say?
No, I was going to say that they, you know, their studio albums are really quite good too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just that
Yeah.
I feel like they're what they're really known for is their live, you know, off the cuff type music. It was just, and when Jerry would miss the words and mix up the words, and the fans would know he was fucking it up. It was great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was the
you know,
whole thing. They were not million-selling albums the way Zeppelin would, or Styx, or any other band from the 70s. They cultivated instead a culture and almost a way of life with their fans, right? And that was the rise of the Deadheads. They cultivated such a loyal following that these fans would follow them for weeks or for months or for tours, and they became known as Deadheads, where it became a way of life being a Deadhead in the 70s, right? Which was,
it
you
sure
know,
did. I never did it. I never toured or anything like that, but I went, I would go to shows in the summertime, but I know people that would tour and follow them around, like, without any shoes on, like that kind of.
yeah, and
I've heard stories. Yeah.
and it
about
became
people.
such a thing. Like Grateful Dead was also known as being very friendly to their fans, meaning they would allow them. They did not discourage bootlegging their shows. They allowed them to bootleg their shows. They would set it. They had specific sections for tapers, right? They had the taper section.
100%. 100%.
And these guys and these fans would bring like serious recording equipment, and they would have the microphones up on the booms above the crowds to catalog and to capture these performances, because that's what the fans that couldn't make it. Or
That's
didn't
how we
follow
originally. That's how we originally, enjoyed the shows. For years, everybody would share tapes.
Yeah. So let's go there then. So when did you first what was your introduction to the Dead, and then when did it become something more than just a band that you liked?
So my uncle was an original Deadhead. He's still alive. I don't want to say was.
Yeah.
He went to his first show in 1967 in probably New York City, I think. And then a few years later, kind of like when I was a little kid, he forced it on me and made me like it. And I didn't think I liked it at the time, but I guess I loved it. And then when I went off to college, freshman year, I went into the dorm, and all I heard was like the Dead playing everywhere, and like everybody's dorm room.
Do you want to shout out the college for all the Deadheads that may have
Syracuse University.
Syracuse,
which was where I actually saw my first concert. I was a sophomore in college, and
Wow,
we waited out.
that didn't take long, did it?
No, no, it
From
didn't.
freshman to sophomore, you're going to shows.
Yeah, I know. My buddies, I had a lot. I assimilated with a lot of deadheads, and it was a natural thing in college. It just seemed like everybody was a deadhead. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. So they played at the Carrier Dome in October of 1984, and we waited out for tickets a few weeks before, and we got fantastic seats. We were 10 rows behind, 10 rows in front of the stage.
Nice.
And for my first show, it was incredible. You know, I mean, I still listen to it sometimes. I'll pull it up on the internet and listen to it anyway, because it just reminds me of when I was there.
Cool.
And it was spectacular.
And then you never looked
They
back
weren't
after
even
that.
at their best. They weren't even at their best, Dean.
Yeah.
They were already kind of waning at that point. You know, I mean, like, I feel like they were great for what I saw at the
Yeah.
time, but we had already missed the best.
So what year was that? What, 85, 86?
84.
84. Okay. So let's kind of use that as the pivot point to talk about this album then. Because this came out in July of 87. The previous album was Go to Heaven, which came out in 1980. So there was a 7-year gap,
Right.
between, and very few bands could get away with that. Very few bands could go without that was that was the magic of the Dead, is they didn't rely on the studio albums. The studio albums were almost seemed like more like contractual obligations. Like, we got to make an album, so let's do it,
Yep.
and kind of do it. So and from what I've been reading about In the Dark, they'd been playing a lot of these songs since 1982 anyway. Like a lot of these songs were in their rotation. So for Deadheads,
Yes,
it
they
shouldn't
were.
have been a surprise, this album, right?
No, none. Actually, most of this, I think, I would say half the songs on that album had been played for years. Yeah,
Okay.
several years anyway.
That's wild. Yeah.
Yeah. So so it was a very comfortable situation. So they decided to go into the studio, hence the name In the Dark. They recorded this album live in a theater, with the lights with an empty, the auditorium was empty. The stage lights were set up the way they would for a tour, so they would feel comfortable. Then they ran all the cables out to the basement, and they played these songs live and recorded them that way. Hence In the Dark, because everything was, the studio, the
And I didn't
Coliseum
even
was
know
dark,
that.
was dark.
And
Yeah.
I didn't even know that.
See that? Imagine what
Oh.
you're going to learn.
I didn't
See?
even know that.
Dean, wow, Dean trumped you on that one. Wow, that's
We get the bell. We get the bell for that. So
Ring the bell.
ring the bell. So that was what it was. So now I want to bring in another thing around the time, because you said that the Dead, in your opinion, were kind of like, on the waning a little bit. I don't want to say they were on the decline, because 1987 something happened in 1987 that brought them a whole other audience, right? Number one, 1987 was the 20th anniversary of the Summer of Love. Okay. So what you started to have was a bunch of hippies or, deadheads from the 60s who had
Right.
children 20 years later, right? They started to have, they would have children. And,
Exactly.
and yeah, so when this album when this album In the Dark comes out, the leadoff single is Touch of Grey, and it's kind of almost embracing the age. I will survive. I'll get by. It's a very easy song. It's a very accessible song. And maybe that's why Deadheads don't like this album, Chris. Is that why? Is because this is more of an accessible album, do you think? For like the non-Grateful Dead fanatic, what you said earlier, that this isn't one of their favorites. Why isn't it? This is not,
I don't know. I like the music. I think the
Okay.
music on that album is good. I mean, I think the songs are good. They're memorable and stuff like that. But I just feel like, it was a little watered down from, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it was too commercialized or
Mhm.
whatever at that point, or
Mhm.
maybe because it became too popular that I didn't like it. But even to this day, and I listen to my Grateful Dead and I hear songs from In the Dark, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna flip it. I'm going.
see what's next. Yeah.
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 See, now for
But-
me, well, let me ask Eric. Did you pick up on this album when it came out?
I did. It was more of the music video I loved.
Yeah, Touch of Grey was in
Touch of
heavy
Grey was a
rotation on MTV.
fantastic Yeah, but I mean,
It
of
was
course,
heavy rotation on it. Yes, it was.
my brother and sister were bigger Deadheads than I was. They had gone to shows. My brother, especially, he had gone to see quite a few times. My sister had friends that were diehard Dead fans. You know, when Jerry Garcia died, I mean, this one of her friends was like out cold, like for like months. He was in mourning because that's how much of a fan he was of Garcia.
I get it. I wasn't quite that bad, but I get it.
Yeah, but the thing for me, it's like their story seems very similar to like the Allman Brothers Band, where they made albums that they had the focus was on making songs. It was more about keeping them short, and you only give so much on the studio side of it, so that these songs could be played live and you can improv and extend them out. That was typically the case. When you go back in their old catalog of the Dead, you know, they got some stuff in there that's pretty lengthy, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, in comparison, yeah, this album was very, you know, I think the longest song on the record is like 7 minutes. Yeah.
That's one of the I was looking on message boards or looking at comments on reviews from fans of why they didn't like it, and that was one of the things they said is like, oh, it's very 80s produced sounding. And I think I think that was a blessing and a curse for the Dead, because what it did is I was not I knew Casey Jones and Truckin', everyone knows those songs, but this album and that music video got me, it kind of perked up my ears. I'm like, well, let me check this out. And I think Chris, you started to hit on that, is that maybe the original Deadheads didn't like that there was this new wave coming in on the back of this album where it became cool, hip, and acceptable to like the Grateful Dead, where before it was kind of counterculture-y, associated with drugs, associated with the hippie lifestyle. Yeah. Now there's kids on the people's shoulders. They're hitting the beach ball around. It became almost more like a fun thing to do, right?
That started to happen in 1987. Would be the year, that summer. That summer tour, after that album was released, I remember going to Giant Stadium. I just graduated college. We a bunch of us went to see the summer tour at Giant Stadium, and it was that kind of a vibe. It was crazy. It was great, but I feel like that I remember that kind of a feeling of that. The old school people weren't appreciative of all these new fans.
Yeah, they were kind of holding on to what they they felt it was that, like the Dead was there. They were there.
Yeah, because
they were there since the beginning, right?
Yeah, and then they felt like the new fans were just there temporarily, kind of thing.
I don't quite remember. Were they typical? Was that the first time they actually started playing stadiums? Was that the norm for the Dead to be playing these big venues? I always thought that they played like smaller arenas, and things like that. I think it didn't really start. They always played like the Garden, for years. They were playing the Garden, but as far as like the big giant stadiums, like Giant Stadium and other football stadiums and stuff like that, it started in the late 80s. It's because of this album, the success. So that had
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
because what you had started to see in 87 and even a little bit before and after was this wave of nostalgia for the 60s, right? Like I said, it was the 20th anniversary of the Summer of Love. The year before this, or maybe 2 years before, you had the Monkees. They had that song, That Was Then, This Is Now. I don't know if you remember that. That was all over MTV, that music video. And then they started playing the Monkees TV show on MTV, right? Then you've got.
I don't remember that.
Yeah,
but I remember the Monkees show. I watched it all the time.
Yeah. So then in '87, you've got the Grateful Dead come out with this album, which all of a sudden everybody embraces. The following year, the Beach Boys hit #1 for the first time in over 20 years with Kokomo.
Yeah,
right. From the other day. So what you get is you get this wave of nostalgia for the '60s, almost like looking through with rose-colored glasses. And now the Dead, who were like the spearhead of like the counterculture movement and represented everything that was against what commercialism represented, was now on the forefront of, let's go to a Dead concert.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I can totally get why the original Deadheads didn't like that. Totally get it.
Yeah, like almost
I'm
like
sort
you're
of in
taking our
between.
stuff, you know.
Yeah,
Right?
like
Yeah,
I'm
it's
in
like I
between,
could,
you know, I mean, I wasn't, you know, part of that or this,
You were
and
kind of in the middle. You were kind of in limbo, like 80, 84, 85. That you're kind of before
well, I
in the
mean, but
dark, right?
also
But you know,
I feel like my uncle being attached to it because of
there
my
you go.
uncle, I was, you know, I was entrenched in
Yeah,
it.
you didn't get
I think you had
grandfather. You
a
didn't get grandfathered, and you got uncled in.
Yeah,
you
I
had
did.
it seems like you had a healthy knowledge of the band and the history of the band. I can imagine, but actually didn't get to see them until the mid 80s. So you start to, yeah, that's it's kind of like that with us too. Like there were certain acts that we came very late on, like I didn't get to see like Eric Clapton until like the
Me
late
neither.
80s. And like Journeyman, that's when I first started seeing these kinds of people. The Beach Boys, we just, Kokomo,
Yeah.
that's the first time I saw the Beach, obviously without Brian Wilson, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, they were touring with Chicago and, things like that at that time.
Yeah.
So yeah, these resurgences of it, and it's just, but something's off a little bit on that. And I can understand where the true fans or the the OG fans would be like,
Well,
wait a minute now.
Here's the thing, right? Yeah, to that
Yeah.
that point, I don't think there's any OG Monkees fans. Like the Monkees kind of hit, like anybody could go to a
Wow.
Monkey show, right? And anybody could go to a Beach Boy show, and that's where the weird dynamic comes in. Is anybody,
Right.
you could take anybody could go to a Beach Boy show and it's fine. Anybody could go see the Monkees if they wanted to.
True.
But going the
yeah.
Grateful Dead represented something different. And now,
Yes.
now all of a sudden they're in the same breath as though like they're looked on with that with that fondness of the hippie era of, oh, remember we used to go get high, we used to go to the Dead show, we'd get ripped, they'd play for 3 hours.
Yeah.
3
Now-
hours. A lot longer than that.
I'm being conservative, but now all of a sudden they're grouped in with these bands that are quote unquote, I'll put them in air quotes, family friendly, where it's like, yeah, now it's okay to take your kids. Like, oh, I'm taking my kids to go see the Dead. They would never do that, back in the day, right? I mean, is that, and is
Well, I think
is that
some
the
of the
ownership
hippies,
that
I
the
think
Dead?
some
Yeah,
of the hippies probably
yeah, they
did.
probably did. But overall,
Yeah.
it becoming a family thing.
And
I think
most of them probably didn't have any clothes on,
yeah. Little kids running around with no diapers.
and the parents.
And so I think that's what it was. I think that's why I think that's where the divisiveness might be. Is that you like, look, Chris, you hit it on the head. Is like the original or the OG Deadheads kind of had a sense of ownership. Like we were there way back when, and now you're like fair weather friends, or you're jumping on the bandwagon, right?
Yeah.
But I think that was but do you think that was a bad thing or a good
No,
thing?
I don't think it was a bad thing at all. It gave them more notoriety and they deserved it. They deserved it. And I think the band was actually happy. I don't know this for sure, but I think if you ask those guys, they would probably have been pretty happy that they got some notoriety.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
Yeah, I think
not
Fair.
that it mattered to them, but I mean, I think they were happy about it.
Yeah, I think I read something where Jerry Garcia it said they were kind of intrigued by it. They said, "Well, we're just going to keep rolling along with it. If people want what we have to offer, we'll just keep going with it. Then
They didn't
and
really
it's-
change too much. Yeah,
Yeah.
they kind of just they polished the music a little bit, and In the Dark is maybe a little more produced than some other things that I enjoy more.
Yeah,
But
Mhm.
it was still the Grateful Dead.
yeah, and that's what caught my ear. And maybe it was and that's that good news bad news thing is what caught my ear was like hell in a bucket. And Throwing Stones, like those are well produced songs, and they're for me they're really, it's enjoyable for me to listen to put this album on and listen to it.
Those are my two favorite songs.
See,
From the album.
I get to stay.
Yeah.
I get to stay on this episode then.
You get to stay.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
Rolling Stones is a great song.
Yeah. So for me, that I can put on In the Dark, and I'm taken back to that summer of '87 when this was happening. The Beatles' Sgt. Pepper was the 20th anniversary also. So there was this wave of hippie nostalgia going on that I can connect with when I put this album on. So yeah, I'm probably one of the fans of it that the Deadheads didn't want to have. But like you said, they opened up to a whole nother audience. It kept them able to tour and make money, right? And like you said, get the respect that they were due for grinding it out year after year in the 70s and,
Yep.
building that fan base of people that were looked upon as who goes to a Dead concert? You got to, you know, now to
Who
now all of a
goes to a
sudden
Dead concert? About 1 million people in the United States, maybe less than that, but they were loyal to as loyal as you could be.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
You know,
yeah, and welcoming. I mean, that was the thing is people probably were afraid of what they didn't understand. You know, so they didn't understand this kind of group of people that would travel with a band or travel to multiple cities, and
Not
then
wear
they had
shoes.
and they had Shakedown Street, right? They created a whole market area, a whole area where people could go and buy things, and you know, it was almost like a communal thing that was going on with them. But it was driven by the fans, right? The Dead weren't doing this. These were the fans.
Totally fan driven completely.
Yeah, and you don't really see usually a band has to put out an album and have a single or make some type of technological leap to be regarded in the pantheon of rock and roll. And the Dead did it a different way. They did it without album, with the benefit of albums. They did it by growing a fan base, which like Dave Matthews would kind of take
Dave
that
Matthews
blueprint.
is similar. Fish is similar.
Yeah, Fish would take that
this
blueprint
whole
also.
Jam.
Yeah.
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 This whole
Of
jam
just
circuit.
being out
Yep.
there. Yeah.
Mhm.
I would even say Tedeschi Trucks, Eric, as well.
Absolutely. They're
They're
carrying
great. They're
on what
fantastic,
the Allman
by the
Brothers
way.
brought.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite bands today.
It's
but,
that-
they're, but there's they have that accessibility that certain fans might gravitate to on Susan's side of the coin, but then you got Derek who does the jamming, and that's what I love about it is there's that dynamic going on there that they can service all types of fans.
Yeah.
They were
You know,
fabulous. I saw them in the Capitol Theater some years ago, and they were really good.
Me and Eric did too. We might have been at this. We might have been at that show.
I never saw him there.
You didn't see him there with me. I saw him at the Capitol Theater. You didn't. You weren't with me.
You saw him by
I saw him at the Beacon with you. That's right. I saw him at the Beacon.
We saw him at the Beacon.
Sorry.
Yeah, Nora Jones
Okay.
came out, and the guy did. One of the guys from Wilco was there.
Yep.
Doyle
Doyle Bramhall
yeah,
was there
so-
too. Yeah, funny
Yeah.
story about that. We go see that one. It was the Tedeschi Trucks and Friends. So each night was a different set of
Yeah.
people. So they
Mhm.
trot out special guest after special guest, and each one plays
Yeah.
like 2 or 3 songs. My
Nice.
favorite, Nora Jones comes out. She plays
She's awesome.
She plays one fucking song and leaves.
And then
He's
The
awesome.
person, the person I wanted to hear the most of was Nora
and
Jones.
Dean,
What a
and Dean
voice
looks
she
at me
has.
and he's like, "What? That's it?" I'm like, "I don't know these people. It's my fault that Nora Jones
Yeah.
played one song."
I blamed Eric. I'm like, you brought me here for Nora Jones, and she played one.
I thought it was
goddamn
great.
song?
I had no
Yeah.
idea that they even knew Nora Jones.
Yeah.
But that's the cool thing.
Yeah,
It's like they just invite people. Nels Klein from Wilco just showed up. He
yeah
started jamming with Derek, and it was fantastic.
Yeah, and that's the way these bands are. There's something about that that connection.
That's right.
Where,
That's how the Dead used to be, man.
Yeah.
They used to have Bob Dylan show up and different people. Like, I mean, lots of other names I can't think of, but they played with the Allman Brothers. They played with lots of, in the 70s, things we don't even remember.
yeah.
But they played with, I saw them play with Dylan. That was really
Yeah.
cool.
You saw
That
Dylan
was
in the
Giant
Dead. What was that?
Stadium.
89?
That was in Giant Stadium.
Yeah, Dylan in the Dead, right? That release.
Yep.
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 Cool. Yeah, and then the Dead would 2 years later. I think because this album did so well for them, they're like, okay, well, we need to get, we're like recording artists now. So 2 years later, they would put out another album, which kind of that was probably
I don't even know, and I don't even know the name of it, Dean.
it's got that song on it, Foolish Heart.
Yeah, I know that song.
Yeah.
But I can't, that's like, this just shows you how they faded for me. Like, I was just like, I couldn't, they I wanted to like new music. By the way, I just want to, I want to digress a little bit.
Built to
Dave
Last. Built to
Matthews-
Last. What it was, the album was called.
Built to Last.
Yeah.
Dave Matthews put out a recent album, and he's got a new song that's fantastic.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
It's called
I've heard it.
Monsters. Have you heard
Yep.
Monsters?
No, I have to check it out.
Yeah, I've heard. Yeah, it's brand new.
I love
It's
it. I
good.
think it's
great.
a great song. One of his best.
Mhm.
Yeah, he
Yeah, I
absolutely,
mean-
he absolutely took that playbook and ran with it. He was like one of the first of the modern, we'll talk like artists from the 90s that I remember was like, yeah, he doesn't really sell a lot of records, but he's always selling out concerts because he's just out there. He continues to engage with his fans. He continues to
That's right.
to be appreciative of it too. I think that's what it is too. I think there's that. I think the fans can feel when an artist is genuine. Chris, is that how you think?
That's how he is.
Part of the
That's why-
secret,
that's why-
and you
yes.
think that's the secret sauce for the Dead, as well.
Absolutely, 100%.
Mhm.
Yeah,
100%.
Yeah, there's that fan base where it's just all word of mouth. They gain their popularity by their sheer talent. First of all, the raw talent, and what you hear is what you get. All the mistakes, all of the things.
Yeah.
It's just out there. It's just raw. It's
Yeah.
beautiful stuff. And on the other hand, it's like you're gaining this group of people that feel like they're part of something, a community, as it were. And it's just I think that's wonderful.
Yeah,
What was the longest show you ever saw, Chris? By the way, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Dean.
What was that?
What was the longest Dead show that you've ever been to?
I mean,
What
by
did
the
it
time
clock
I
in
started
as?
by the time I started to see them, they had toned down the all night shows that they used to do in the 70s and things like that. I mean, I probably 4 hours, 4.5 hours.
Okay, so
something
they
like that.
literally did like
a
all
healthy
night
dose still.
shows.
Yeah.
two sets.
See that?
2 sets, usually an hour and a half each.
See that's how like TTB does it. They break up their set. If they're playing the Beacon, it's going to be a jam. It's going to be a long night.
Yeah.
So they're honoring those traditions. But yeah, that's the staple, right? Dean and I would hear these stories about like, oh, that's why we wanted to see the Dead,
Yeah.
because I want to see a freaking 6-hour show, man. How does
Yeah.
that happen? Like,
For me, it was the communal aspect too. I wanted
Yeah.
to be I wanted to, after seeing the footage and seeing what that experience looked like, I'm like, wow, it might be fun. I was anybody listen, you could call me bandwagon because I absolutely would have been. Had I gone back then, I would have been bandwagon.
I think you would have been on the bandwagon, Dean.
Yeah, I would have gone for the experience, and who knows what would have happened. But I was absolutely one of those people that was affected by In the Dark. Like when it came out, it was kind of like, okay, they're not this threatening. The Dead. It's like, oh, the Dead. You're going to see the Dead. It sounds like something you don't want to do. Like, oh, the Dead. It's like, no, it's like, oh, it's these guys. It's great music. It's kind of easy. I don't want to say easy going. It's not like easy listening, but it's easygoing music. You chill out.
They could jam like nobody's.
Yeah,
business.
you chill out. You go there. You relax, and you and I think they brought the notion of a concert as more than a group of musicians playing on the stage. I think they kind of created a concert.
They created a
experience.
family, man. They created a family and experience that you felt like you were a part of a community. Like I think they were probably maybe the first of their kind to make you feel that way about a band.
Yeah,
I don't think there's anything.
I don't think anybody felt like there was a community around Elvis or the Beatles. Or any of those other bands.
Or like Jefferson Airplane that came up around the same time with the Doors.
Those were acts that were like way beyond anybody's reach. You really there really wasn't a connection there to people like the Beatles or even Elvis for that, when he got really huge, and there's that distance, there's that, because they're so big and so popular.
Right.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with, like Dean's experience with this album. That's how you got to know the Dead. I love that. I love, some people, it's not going to be their greatest album per se, but that was the open door.
Exactly.
For walking in, and that was like the gateway album for certain people, and
for a whole new generation. I mean, I used to work with a guy, 87. I was working in a pizzeria. I used to make pizza and deliver pizza, whatever, yada, yada, yada. And then like this like 16-year-old kid comes into work and he was getting into the Dead. Like, so it was hitting, it was reaching far and wide, and you can't dismiss the power. We talk about it a lot, the power of MTV, like showing the video for Touch of Grey and having it in rotation with Bon Jovi, and they're swinging, they're in there swinging with all these popular bands of the day, and people are embracing, and people are embracing this quirky video of them as, it was very clever of them as skeletons, and so there was a hook there for people to grab into. I think much to the fans' chagrin, this opened up the Dead to a whole new fan base, and really, I think it gave them. I think it allowed. I think it made critics also re kind of visit them,
Yeah.
and look at them as
nobody talked about them at all. I
Yeah.
mean, they were nobody said a word about them until In the Dark. It's
yeah,
like,
because they were
they
just
might-
road warriors, right? They were just always out on the road, just always just
Touring,
touring,
constantly
grinding it out,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden they became like rock and roll survivors. It's like, wow, there's if you go through the history of the Dead, there has been some deaths, and they didn't come out fully intact, but for the most part, they did survive. They made it through. The nucleus of the Dead.
I mean,
it
Jerry,
through.
even without Jerry, it went on. It's
Yeah.
it's gone on for 25 years without Jerry.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then the
it's not-
offshoots, of Phil Lesh
I know,
doing his
that's
Phil
what I
thing.
mean.
Lesh and
That just tell you
Friends and
the power of the music. The music is that good
Yeah.
that it influenced that many people. There must be something to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
And Bob Weir now tours as Bobby Weir, I guess, right? He
Yeah.
calls himself Bobby Weir. So he's gotten actually younger, but his beard has gotten really longer.
But it's also they also extended the band too, like adding musicians. Bruce Hornsby,
Yeah.
Who
After
got-
Brent
who-
after
who
Brent
made it-
Midland passed away. Yeah.
Right.
Bruce Hornsby joined the band for a time. That blew my mind when I found out that he became part of that jam circuit. Like he was even doing his own thing, but putting out live albums and things to that effect. He became a member of that community, so to speak.
Yeah.
I know.
And you think about like the way it is and how polished that sound was, but he could jam. Yeah, I've
I
heard
was
some of
very
his stuff.
surprised
He's
when he joined-
fantastic.
When he
Yeah.
joined the band, I was really surprised. I didn't realize that he had that connection with them, and I was
Yeah.
like, wow. And I saw a few concerts with him playing keyboard.
It makes sense.
He was great.
It actually it makes perfect sense when you think about it. It's like you can't just take it at face value. That one album that or a couple albums that he did, it was just that.
Yeah,
he was
and that was
a
very
really
80s
great
sounding.
musician.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Those albums, the way it is, Bruce Hornsby had
Right.
that 80s polish on it. So yeah, but a lot of people are probably scratching their heads of like, Bruce Hornsby is going to play with the Dead, but that was right
Yeah.
after the passing of Brent Midland, who
Right.
who was around for a while since the late 70s and was kind of becoming a key songwriter. He was starting to sing a lot more on the albums, and then he kind of passed away, and another
Well, he
another
had a
change for
heroin.
the Dead.
He,
Yeah,
he had a bad heroin addiction.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that facilitated another change for the Grateful Dead. But that, that core of Jerry Garcia, Bob Weir, Phil Lesh, Bill Kreutzmann, and Mickey Hart were always they were like the heartbeat, the keyboardists that seemed to be the ones that always had the problems that would pass away or, really kind of couldn't sustain it. But that nucleus of the band, held strong and held firm through, through thick and thin. Through the lean times of the 70s and not, and then the 80s, trying to figure out, that like with that Go to Heaven album is like trying to figure out where do we fit, because music was changing. They fit in well with the 70s, but in the 80s, you started to get the electronic stuff, and they didn't take the bait. They just didn't record anything,
And
like
they did their own thing.
Right.
yeah, they
Their
really
own
didn't
thing.
try and go with it. They didn't
Yeah.
try and say, oh, we got to make it, everyone's using drum machines and we got to do that. They actually just kind of receded a little bit from the recording aspect of it, continued to tour, worked out.
I will say, I'm going to give you some homework to do.
Okay.
I would
do I need
listen
a pen?
if you want to listen to the original keyboard player,
Pig pen?
he was the best. The guy who played, his name was Pigpen.
Yep.
Yeah.
He had a blues background. His soulful sound was so different than, it was like the Grateful Dead had two, they were like a dichotomy.
Mhm.
They had two different, they had this like, this country blues kind of thing going on. Then they had this other thing going on, which was this
Right.
really hard and heavy blues, and he did a lot of old blacks, standards,
Mhm.
from, Smokestack Lightning. You ever
Yeah.
heard that song?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Tremendous fucking song.
Mhm.
And he redid that song in such a great way, and so many others. He died. He was only 27 years old
Yeah.
when the guy died.
Tragedy.
And that's
Tragic.
But that's fantastic. I like that the blending of genres there is what makes these bands so likable and so appealing. You know, and that's what I would like to. I'd love to go see. Like, I want to see these guys do their thing in the improvisation moments. The it's
Yeah, that's the
just
best part of it.
yeah,
Without question.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and Garcia had his own side projects with Dave Grisman and kind of doing some of the jug band stuff, right? So there was room
Well,
for
the Jerry Garcia band was the Jerry
Yeah.
Garcia band was almost as big as the Grateful Dead.
yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I never got to see them, and I feel that that was a miss on my part.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Yeah.
if you listen to Jerry Garcia band music and Grateful Dead music, I mean, you can't maybe tell the difference necessarily, but there's different musicians in there, and it does sound different, and
Sure.
it's amazing.
Yeah.
Cool.
Amazing.
And he was, well, Garcia, let's just comment on him. I mean, what a great guitar player he was. He had a sound of his own. He was just, the way he was able to, it was like a bird taking flight. And I don't want to sound corny or anything, but his very unique tone to his guitar and the way his phrasing. Yeah, he was great. Yeah, he's missed.
You play
missed.
guitar? You sound like you
I
play
don't
guitar.
actually. I don't. But I like guitar players who tend to make their guitar sound like a voice. Like I enjoy single note playing, that kind of thing. They sustain notes. They, like much like a human voice. A lot of my favorite players, and to me, I mean, guitar, jazz and blues guitar is it for me. That's typically my favorite type of guitar playing. I'm more on the drumming side. I like drummers, and that's my instrument of choice.
My son,
Dean could tell you that he's Dean's a very frustrated guitar player and bass player, right?
Frustrated on all ends, frustrated on every instrument. The only thing I'm decent at is ukulele at this point, honestly.
and the flutophone. Can you play the flutophone?
The flutophone, I'll find one on eBay. I'll go see if I can.
Yeah.
That was the first thing that everybody got in second grade was the flutophone.
Yeah.
To see if you had any talent.
Yeah.
Probably not. As we wind this down, I'll kick it over to you, Chris. So we're talking about in the dark, and I'm going to recommend if someone's not a Dead fan, I'm just going to recommend they start here, right? Because I think this is probably the easiest point of entry, and it's probably something that people are most familiar with, right? So let's kind of set the table that way. Is if you've never listened to the Dead before, I'm going to say start with this. Now I'm going to kick it. Now I'm going to kick it over. I'm kicking it over to you now. After they listen to In the Dark, what should follow? What two albums outside of live stuff? What two albums would you recommend that if somebody wants to go further, if this intrigued them, what would you recommend?
Without question, without even in a second of doubt, it's the two albums that were made together in 1971, American Beauty and Working Man's Dead.
Okay. There you have it. American Beauty and Working Man's Dead. He didn't hesitate.
Play them all together. They're tremendous. They were all recorded at the same time, but they were released at different times, but they're from 1971. It's their best work.
There it is.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
From someone who was on the bandwagon to somebody who was pre-bandwagon.
And
I'm very familiar.
And that studio stuff is fabulous. It's
good stuff. I mean, I'm very familiar with Mars Hotel. My sister was a big fan of that record.
And I would have said Mars Hotel would have been my other choice after
Unbroken Chain is an amazing
great song.
That's one of my favorites.
That's a Phil Lesh song.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a little.
And they go off, and I mean, they start freaking jamming on that thing. That thing just takes off in a whole direction. It's almost like prog rock. It's like it's beyond just the laid back sort of jamming.
On that album, Loose Lucy. Do you ever hear Loose Lucy?
No.
Yes.
Check that one out on that album.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There it is.
That's
a bad all the time. Yeah.
So American Beauty, Working Man's Dead, and then Eric is kicking in with Mars Hotel, and Chris is putting a stamp on it.
I concur with that.
You concur.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm glad that he's
No,
got,
it's good.
I'm the '80s guy, so I'm gonna have to take a step back. But
But you asked me because somebody who's never heard the Grateful Dead, they're starting with In the Dark.
yes,
I mean, I got to direct them right away to the
That's-
original core,
yeah, that's why
Yeah.
I asked you. I'll give
But
I'll
Mars Hotel,
open the
Mars
door for him.
Hotel is a good choice too.
Is a good one too. And all the and their catalog is on Spotify, so this stuff is easy to find. And if you go to Spotify, you will be inundated with live stuff as well. So if you really want to see what the Dead was
Better.
about, it's the lot. That's
and
really what they're about.
Am I allowed to shout out to another podcast on here?
As long as they're a good podcast. Go ahead, go for it.
So, so, all right, guys, let me tell you something. I've been
Yes.
listening. The only podcast I've been listening to since I first started listening to podcasts,
Uh-huh.
probably 7 or 8 years ago, is this thing called the Dead. It's called the Dead Pod.
Okay.
Let me guess what
This
it's about.
guy, his nickname is the Professor,
Uh-huh.
and every week he plays one show from around that time, whatever that day is.
Yeah.
He'll say, oh, 30 years ago today, 40
Right.
years ago today, and then he does a little story about it and plays a half a show. It'll be one set, and then he play the next set the following week.
So it's called the Dead Pod.
It's called the Dead Pod.
Okay.
It's a fabulous way to learn about the band, and from somebody who really loves the music. I listen to it every week.
Okay, so what we'll do then is I'll drop a link in the show notes. So this way, anybody that wants to check out the Dead Pod, they'll be able to click on the link and it'll take them to that show on Spotify. So if people want to go even a little
I
further,
don't want to be like cross marketing or anything like that.
that's
So-
all right.
No,
Just make sure,
no,
just
no.
make sure they give you the check. Just make sure they pay you. I don't know what arrangement it was, but you get it all. I think that's going to do it for this episode. I think we've talked about, we talked about In the Dark, but mainly I wanted Chris on also to kind of fill in the backstory about the Dead. God, you got
We
more?
didn't talk about my first acid experience though.
I didn't know we were gonna.
Oh.
Let's do it.
Let's hear it.
No, I'm
Was
okay.
it was it at a Dead show?
It was.
Well, now you got to tell. Now you're not.
Now
we're
you
not
gotta
ending,
tell us. Come
yeah,
on,
we're
man.
not ending until you tell it now. So the first time you took acid was at a Dead show.
All right.
When?
So my buddy who I was at college with, he was the one who introduced me to these things and whatnot. He introduced me to the Grateful Dead, even though I already knew the band. He was like, "Come on, we're going to the show, yada yada. We're gonna do this." And so we do it. We take the acid, and we're really close to the stage. And I remember kids were getting like too crushed close to the stage, and like people were getting smushed close by the stage. And then this huge giant policeman, he would look like he was about 12 feet tall because I was so, whatever. He was the biggest fucking policeman I ever saw in my life. He came out and he was like, "Everybody take a step back." And then Bob Weir came out and he came out with his guitar and he goes, 1, 2, 3, take a step back. 2, and he kept doing it. And if you ever listen to the concert from that night, if you have a chance to listen to this show from October in 1984, you hear Bobby doing that. I mean, and we were in that crowd and we were getting smushed a little bit, but we were back a little bit. We weren't, nothing was going to happen, but we were freaking the fuck out.
So how was the trip?
It was great.
It was great.
It sounds like.
Do you remember
Freaked
Jamie
out. The
Brent?
cop was the-
What?
Yes.
Do you remember
Jamie Brent.
Brent?
Yeah, of course.
He
These
showed
are,
up
we're
at my-
going back to high school now, okay?
Yeah,
Yes.
I know.
Yeah.
So he was like he was a traveling little partier, that kind of thing. He showed up at this Dead show, and then he ended up sleeping in my fraternity that night.
He crashed.
Like he came over and he was like, we had this huge party in my house after the show. There was people all over the place. We didn't know. They all came back and were just like sleeping in everybody's houses and shit,
that was how it was, right?
And Jamie Brent ends up showing him up in my fraternity. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing here?
He was. I guess he was traveling with the Dead, right? He's probably following him, I guess, right? Or no?
He was. No,
Yeah.
he was.
Yeah.
Was he barefoot?
Just couch surfing. That's the way it was back then. Is you kind of you showed up and you hoped for the best. So
Yeah, I think he was on the road like with them.
Wow, that's
Jack
pretty neat.
Kerouac style.
Pretty neat. I did
Wow.
not on my sheet. I did not have the question about you taking acid, so forgive me for not asking. I didn't know that was part. I didn't know.
My first show. My first show was my first acid experience. So I
Okay,
think
so you
that's
got it all
fair.
done in one shot, and then after that, it was all good.
Nice.
Cool.
Okay.
All right, that's gonna do it for this episode of the 3324 podcast. Chris Geiger, oh my God, thank you so much
Pleasure, sir.
thank you so much for joining us.
So good to
It
see
was
you.
good to be with you guys. It's nice seeing you both.
Yeah.
We definitely
Yeah.
want to have you back on again. This was a lot of fun, and thank you for sharing your experiences and your perspective on it from someone who's kind of lived it and obviously tripped through it and came through the other side. Thank God as well.
Well,
So-
I got to thank my uncle. I got to thank my uncle for
Shout out to-
getting me
who-
high when I was 9 years old.
who's your uncle? What's his name?
My uncle Kenny.
Uncle Kenny. I have an Uncle Kenny too. So shout out to Uncle Kenny for introducing Chris to this and probably changing his life. I would venture a guess that it was a life-changing
In a
experience.
very positive way.
Awesome.
Oh,
That's going to do it.
great.
For Chris, for Eric, this has been Dean. We will catch you on the flip side.
Stop